Mel Gibson's been trying to warn everyone about the elites for years, and in particular Hollywood itself.
Believe me, I did a lot of research on it, and according to all the research, it was way worse than that.
No matter how strong you are going to be affected by this play, and you'll resent it for a little while, then you have to let it go. Otherwise, you'll eat yourself alive here. And I think it takes that kind of cockroach resilience to survive in this town.
Yet, nobody listened. He was just made out to be a crazy man. But today, people are finally waking up to what he saw 20 years ago, and the message he gave us would eventually cost him his life.
You need a bat in the side of the head. If you get by a pack of it'll be your fault.
Yet, back in the 1980s, Gibson was so successful he was operating at a level where studios would greenlight whatever he wanted. In 1996, Braveheart swept the Oscars, 5 wins including Best Picture and Best Director. Gibson stood on that stage and called himself a fiscal imbecile.
And they had no problem with giving the reins to a fiscal imbecile. You know, this takes real courage.
And everyone laughed because he made them all very rich. But if you were paying attention around then, there were signs he saw Hollywood very differently than most people who'd made it to his level. In 1998, Playboy did an interview, and buried in all the usual promotional stuff about whatever film he was selling, he said something that did raise some eyebrows. He talked about
아무도 그의 말을 듣지 않았습니다. 그는 미친 사람으로 치부됐죠. 그런데 20년이 지난 지금 그가 경고했던 것들이 하나씩 현실이 되고 있습니다.
The funding dries up rapidly after that, and he practically becomes a laughingstock. He's putting his entire reputation in Hollywood on this movie. South Park then catches the zeitgeist with The Passion of the Jew. Stan and Kenny see the film, hate it, call it a snuff film, and track down Gibson for a refund. Their version of Gibson is completely unhinged, a masochistic lunatic running around shooting guns and literally defecating on people. Gibson's response at the time was defiance. He self-finances the entire production, remortgaging property, coming up with $45 million out of his own pocket. If this bombs, he's then personally destroyed. So the film opens on Ash Wednesday 2004. Critics are split. There are massive protests outside theatres, but also massive lines of people wanting to see it. It then goes on to gross $83 million in its opening weekend, and goes on to make $612 million worldwide, the highest grossing R-rated film at the time. Gibson then personally walks away with somewhere between $400 and $475 million. So from the industry's perspective, he has now made one of the most profitable films in history, even after every major studio rejected it entirely on his own terms. On the Joe Rogan Experience, Gibson talked about how turbulent this was.
That was a crazy movie because it was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
Oh yeah, no, there was,
which I thought was very strange. There was like Hollywood resistance to that movie. Like people didn't like that you were making it. It seemed like
there was a lot of opposition to it, and I don't know. I think if you ever hit on that subject matter, you're gonna get people going, because
of course
it's big subject matter.
He even said how Hollywood was stunned by him walking around the system and scoring a massive hit without going through the usual channels.
And there was this kind of thing in the town. They said, did anyone just see that? Anyone just see what that guy did? Can't let that guy do that again. You know, because it sort of walked around the entire system.
It was a well-received podcast because Gibson, for all his woes, came across as more down-to-earth than your average massive star. Comments observed that he was holding back on topics.
7개 스튜디오에 모두 거절당한 영화. 자기 돈 4,500만 달러를 걸었습니다. 결과는 6억 달러. 시스템 없이 혼자 만든 영화가 역사상 가장 수익성 높은 R등급 영화가 됐습니다.
Courtney Love makes a joke about him in 2005.
Do you have any advice for a young girl moving to Hollywood?
I'll get lively with us. Harvey Weinstein invites you to a private party in the Four Seasons downtown.
And this joke effectively blacklisted her from Hollywood. Weinstein kept working until 2017, until 80 women came forward. Rose McGowan helped expose his decades of abuse and was virtually blacklisted by Hollywood in the aftermath. But he's just one of many. Roman Polanski pleaded guilty to unlawful sex with a 13-year-old in 1977, when he then fled the country. At the 2003 Oscars, 26 years later, he wins Best Director and gets a standing ovation.
Goes for Roman Polanski, for the pianist.
Woody Allen faces allegations from his adopted daughter. Court documents later show nearly 100 meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, but he's never left the big time and still regularly makes blockbusters. Filmmaker Bryan Singer faced multiple allegations and settled lawsuits, yet he kept on getting hired. Bohemian Rhapsody won 4 Oscars not long ago. The list is pretty much endless, and if anything, it gets worse the deeper you look. Victor Salva was convicted in 1988 for sexually abusing a 12-year-old. He served only 15 months. And then Hollywood kept on hiring him to direct children's movies. They kept separating art from artists when it's convenient. Dan Schneider, all these guys, which sends a very clear economic message. Employing problematic people is fine as long as they continue to serve the right ends. This isn't a game of whataboutery. Hollywood is a system where morals are relative. It's not about the severity of what you did, it's about how politically expensive it becomes to ignore it. Gibson's anti-Semitism and abuse, especially in an industry full of Jewish people, is unforgivable to many, and Robert Downey Jr.'s plea for mercy doesn't really erase that. But Hollywood didn't exile him because those things are morally worse than drugging and assaulting people, or fleeing the country after pleading guilty to raping a child. They exiled him because his scandals were loud, public, and impossible to spin. The industry is selective about who becomes the boogeyman, and that selection has nothing to do with who actually did the worst things. Gibson's redemption arc continued in 2016.
깁슨이 추방당하는 동안 실제 성범죄자들은 오스카 기립박수를 받았습니다. 할리우드는 도덕으로 움직이지 않습니다. 스캔들이 얼마나 시끄러운가로 움직입니다.
Around the film's release, viral quotes started spreading about Gibson's conspiratorial view, claiming he exposed elites drinking children's blood, Andrew comb harvesting, and satanic rituals, QAnon-type stories. Every single quote attributed to Gibson is fake. They trace only to yournewswire.com, a notorious misinformation site. Maybe it's part of yet another smear campaign designed to muddy Gibson's rehabilitation and feed tabloid headlines to keep his reputation questionable. Or maybe it's a manifestation of him becoming a symbol onto which both sides of the culture war paint their narratives. To some, he's a martyred truth teller, to others, a cautionary tale of when mental health issues and anger take hold of someone. Either way, the fake quotes spread because they sound like what people already believe about him. That was South Park's parody too. They were saying Gibson made this very public monster out of himself. In reality, the truth behind Gibson's criticism of the establishment is probably more of a case of something simpler yet no less horrifying. The banality of evil. Thousands of people making small, cowardly decisions that add up to systemic abuse. Which is far more disturbing because it implicates everyone through their daily choices in supporting and protecting the industry. Unlike blood-drinking rituals, everyone is capable given the right incentives. When asked at the Hacksaw Ridge press conference to describe Hollywood in one word, Gibson laughed. Just one word? Then he gave his answer: survival. He's right. Everyone's trying to survive, and survival means making calculations about who you can cross and who you can't. But Hollywood's evil operates on a different level altogether. It's not the deranged actions of a troubled man. It's structural, institutional. It's the sober, calculated decision to protect people for decades. So in the end, there are no heroes in this story, just different flavors of the same human capacity to harm people and justify it in the morning.